The night air was still when the red and blue glow hit my rearview mirror. Cheap magnetic lights wobbling on a black SUV that had no business pretending to be official. I was driving home from a 12-hour patrol shift. Unmarked cruiser, radio off. The kind of quiet only cops understand after chaos. The horn blared twice. Then came the loudspeaker. "Pull over immediately. This is HOA Enforcement." Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. HOA Enforcement on a state highway. I eased to the shoulder, curiosity outweighing irritation, and waited. Out stepped a woman with mirrored sunglasses too large for her face, clipboard clutched like a weapon. She strutted up, voice sharp with self-importance. "You're in violation of community traffic compliance," she said. "Residents aren't allowed to exceed 35. I looked past her. Highway 67, speed limit 65. "Ma'am," I replied evenly, "you realize this is a state highway?" She frowned. "Don't argue. Multiple complaints came in about your vehicle speeding through the subdivision." Subdivision? Nothing but pine, asphalt, and darkness. Then her partner arrived, a man in a neon vest with a plastic badge that looked like it came from a Halloween aisle. "License and registration," he barked, tone rehearsed but shaking. I kept my hands visible. "Sure thing," I said, reaching slowly for my wallet. When the leather flipped open, my highway patrol badge caught the headlights and flared gold. The man's color drained. The woman froze mid-sentence. "You're—" "Yes, ma'am," I said. "The real police." Silence pressed between us. She tried to recover, waving her clipboard like a shield. "That's impossible. HOA Enforcement has authority here." "On private property, maybe," I said, voice calm but final. "This isn't your little HOA road. This is my highway." Behind us, traffic slowed. Phones lifted. Her fake lights flickered twice, then died. And that's when I said what would echo across every news feed by morning. "You just tried to pull over the highway patrol, on the highway." Her jaw fell open. In that second, arrogance turned to dread. I took their IDs, logged the vehicle, and called it in. The dispatcher's laugh crackled through the radio. "You've got to be kidding me, Hale. HOA cops." "Not kidding," I said. "Run the plate." "Unregistered," she replied. "Probably stolen." When I turned back, Karen, her name tag actually said Karen L. Gates, was shaking. "This is harassment," she stammered. "We have community authority." "You have a clipboard," I said, "and a magnetic light bar." The man beside her muttered something about citizen oversight. I stepped out, full height, letting the badge glint. Authority doesn't shout. It stands still. "Hands where I can see them." They froze. I called for backup, and within minutes the real units rolled up, blue strobes washing the trees. Deputies stepped out, smirking when they saw the scene. 2 self-appointed officers detained beside their SUV with fake decals peeling under the lights. Karen sputtered explanations. "We're protecting property values. We had complaints." "Ma'am," one deputy said, "your HOA doesn't extend 20 miles down a state highway." As they were escorted off, I looked at the clipboard she'd dropped. It was filled with handwritten citations, dozens of them, signed with her own initials and stamped with a counterfeit seal. I slipped one sheet into an evidence bag. Something about it felt off. Too organized for just delusion. Back at my cruiser, I leaned against the hood, letting the night settle. Cameras flashed from passing cars. Social media would chew on this for days. But beneath the absurdity, my instincts stirred. People like Karen never operate alone. I drove off, the fake HOA SUV towed behind another unit. Yet even as the highway stretched quiet again, a thought gnawed at me. If they had the nerve to impersonate police on an open road, what else were they pretending to be in those neighborhoods? The radio crackled. Dispatch checking status. All clear, I said, but my gut said otherwise. By the time I reached my driveway, the moon had risen high and the house lights glowed warm. For the first time that day, I felt the edge of fatigue. Still, before stepping inside, I scanned the tree line, habit etched by years of service. Nothing moved. Yet the silence felt too clean, like the world holding its breath. What I didn't know then was that this wasn't over. The fake HOA wasn't just a bad joke. It was a mask for something darker, something that would soon reach straight into my jurisdiction and test everything I stood for. And that's where the real story begins. I grew up with the law in my blood. My father was a sheriff before me, the kind who didn't need to raise his voice to make a room fall silent. My mother served in the Marines, her medals tucked away in a drawer she never opened, saying the weight of metal couldn't measure the cost of service. I carried both their shadows when I put on my first badge. Over 15 years of highway patrol, I'd learned that real authority isn't loud. It's the quiet certainty of knowing right from wrong when others twist it for gain. That's why the HOA encounter rattled something deep. It wasn't the stupidity of fake cops trying to flex on the highway. It was the principle behind it. Pretend power has always been the seed of corruption. I'd seen it in combat zones overseas, where uniform imposters turned chaos into fear, and I'd seen it at home when untrained security volunteers played soldier on private streets. Pretending to have authority was more than illegal. It was a disease that infected communities with submission. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. My captain always said, "Hale, the scariest thing about fake power is how quickly people believe it's real." That thought stuck with me as I wrote the incident report that night. The paperwork was routine. Date, location, violation code, but my mind kept looping through details that didn't fit. The SUV had professional-grade decals, not some backyard sticker job. The badges had serial numbers engraved in consistent font. The clipboard had printed letterheads marked Community Enforcement Division, with a logo clean enough to pass for municipal branding. That wasn't Karen's doing. She was the face, not the source. People like her crave control but rarely design the system. They're drawn to it like moths to the warmth of authority. I'd dealt with Karens before. Petty tyrants hiding behind homeowners' bylaws, bullies who mistake property management for law enforcement. But this one had a partner with a badge number, paperwork, and a chain of command that didn't exist on any record. Someone was funding this, and whoever they were had resources. The next morning I sat in my office reviewing highway footage. At 18:32 hours, Karen's SUV appeared on camera 1 mile before the stop. The license plate matched nothing in the DMV system. The vehicle's VIN, once cross-checked, traced back to a dissolved LLC under the name Dean Property Holdings. The name triggered a faint memory from a fraud case 3 years earlier, an HOA in the next county that had embezzled homeowner dues and filed for bankruptcy before anyone could prosecute. The director's name on record, Curtis Dean. It wasn't proof, but it was a thread, and threads have a way of leading somewhere if you pull hard enough. I logged the discovery and made a call to my captain, Daniels, who'd been through more investigations than I could count. His voice came over the line, rough and steady, the kind of tone that never wavered under pressure. "You're telling me they tried to pull over a trooper on state asphalt?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I said. "And they had paperwork that looks official." He paused for a moment that stretched too long. "Then you've got more than idiots playing cop, Hale. You've got a con with infrastructure." I spent that afternoon combing through county records. Buried between property filings and maintenance invoices, I found recurring transfers to shell accounts labeled Neighborhood Safety Program. Every check carried the same signature, Curtis Dean. The handwriting leaned forward like it was chasing its own arrogance. The totals weren't small. Over 2 years, nearly $2 million moved through those accounts, justified as community security enhancements. Cameras, signage, patrol vehicles, all tax-free under HOA exemption codes. Whoever set this up knew the law well enough to bend it. My legal training kicked in, every statute number lining up like coordinates. HOA authority is confined to private property under State Civil Code Proarv 72303. Anything beyond that, detaining, citing, or impersonating police, falls under Federal Title 18, Section 912, impersonation of a federal officer. That's a felony. The realization hit with a quiet fury. This wasn't neighborhood gossip. It was organized fraud hiding behind the mask of suburban order. I printed the records, each sheet smelling faintly of toner and deceit. Karen had believed she was the law, but she was just a pawn. The true authority belonged to the man behind the curtain, the brother she never mentioned, the one who used fake HOA power to buy silence from homeowners and fear from anyone who resisted. As daylight faded, I drove through Karen's subdivision, the real one. Manicured lawns, identical mailboxes, the illusion of peace. A sign at the entrance read, Dean Ridge Estates, maintained by Civic Enforcement Trust. I parked near the community center and watched a man in a reflective vest lock the doors. The logo on the van matched the paperwork I'd confiscated, an eagle clutching scales. It was bold, confident, designed to fool anyone who didn't know better. Inside, the lights flickered off one by one, leaving only the glow of the HOA's new security cameras residents probably paid for twice over. I walked the perimeter slowly, hands tucked in jacket pockets. Every detail screamed corporate fraud, leased vehicles under fake entities, infrastructure funded by invisible budgets, authority built entirely on fear and ignorance. The deeper I looked, the more it mirrored operations I'd seen overseas when militias disguised extortion as governance. Different flag, same motive. Control through illusion. That night, I called an old contact in the Attorney General's office, a woman named Ellen Voss. We'd worked together years earlier on a task force dismantling a corrupt security contractor. When I told her about the HOA impersonators, she didn't laugh. "You're not dealing with homeowners, Hale," she said. "You're looking at a privatized policing model. We've seen it before. Small towns outsourcing enforcement to unlicensed firms. Most fold fast, some turn criminal." Her words landed like gravel. "If Curtis Dean's involved, expect paper trails and intimidation. He hides behind bureaucracy until someone pushes back." "I'm pushing," I said. "Then document everything, and don't underestimate them." When the call ended, the house was silent. I poured a coffee that went cold before I touched it. The badge on my desk caught a sliver of moonlight, a reminder of what separates real duty from the illusion of it. People like Karen think power is something you print on paper. People like Curtis know it's something you buy with silence. But real authority, the kind my parents taught me, comes from standing between both and saying no. I wrote until dawn, compiling every link, every transaction, every photograph from the stop. Each page was another brick in a wall I planned to build around their operation until it collapsed under its own lies. I knew what was coming. Fake warrants, anonymous threats, the usual smokescreen. But truth has a way of surviving noise. As the sun rose, turning the windows gold, I closed the file and whispered a quiet promise to myself. This time they wouldn't bury it under paperwork. This time the HOA cops were going to meet someone they couldn't intimidate. Curtis Dean wasn't just a name on paper. He was the ghost behind the HOA's throne, the one pulling strings while letting his sister play queen of a kingdom she barely understood. Hoakaren's arrogance was visible from a mile away, but Curtis's corruption was buried deep beneath a polished layer of legality, I'd seen his kind before. Men who hide theft behind policy, who learn that a corporate seal and a confident tone can rob people faster than a gun ever could. The deeper I dug, the clearer it became that this wasn't about homeowners, fences, or bylaws. It was about money. Quiet money, disguised as neighborhood maintenance fees, siphoned into shell companies with names designed to sound patriotic. Community Protection Services, Civic Development Fund, Dean Residential Trust. They weren't protecting anything. They were extorting their own neighbors under the illusion of order. And Karen, with her clipboard and toy badge, had become the face of their empire. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. The next week, I visited one of the homeowners who had filed complaints before the HOA dissolved. A man named Robert Langley, retired Navy, eyes sharp with the kind of discipline that never fades. He met me on his porch, the smell of motor oil and coffee thick in the morning air. "You're the trooper from the video," he said. "The one she pulled over." I nodded. He didn't laugh. He just shook his head. "You don't know how deep this goes." He told me about fake citations that arrived monthly, warnings about grass length, mailbox paint, even parking angles. "They fined me $1,200 for having my flag too high on the pole," he said, voice tight. "When I refused to pay, they sent what looked like court documents, official seals, clerk signatures. Turns out none of it existed." He handed me a stack of papers, each stamped with a fake legal emblem that would fool anyone outside law enforcement. The typography alone was nearly perfect. These weren't amateur scams. They were structured operations. I took the documents to my captain, spreading them across his desk. He ran a hand over the embossed letterhead. "Looks official enough for a county filing," he said. "But look closer. Wrong shade of ink, seal alignments off by 2 millimeters. He leaned back, exhaling through his nose. Whoever made these had access to a real clerk's template. That was the moment I knew. Curtis had help inside local government. Fraud that clean required cooperation, or at least someone looking the other way. Daniels looked at me. "You think he's got a mole in city records?" "Or someone he's paying to stay blind," I said. The captain's lips tightened. "Then we go federal." We looped in the FBI's Financial Crimes Division. The agent assigned was Special Agent Morales, a quiet operator with a resume full of takedowns that never made the news. When I handed her the evidence, she didn't ask for explanation. She just nodded once. "Dean's popped up before," she said. "Property laundering through fake HOA fronts. We suspected he expanded after the last investigation stalled." I asked why it stalled. She hesitated. The witnesses stopped cooperating. The unspoken message hung in the air. They didn't stop by choice. Over the next few days, Morales and I dissected Curtis's network. His companies were layered through 6 states, using virtual addresses and registered agents that changed every quarter. Each HOA he created started the same way. A charismatic community figurehead, usually someone like Karen, would promise local control and property value protection. They'd install their own board, collect dues, and start enforcing regulations nobody ever voted for. Those fines, those late fees, they weren't going to neighborhood maintenance. They were wired offshore through dummy construction projects. I'd seen criminal organizations use the same pattern overseas, but this was worse. It was domestic, legal-looking, and funded by good people who thought they were paying for safety. We obtained surveillance from the county building department and caught Curtis entering under a fake contractor license. The timestamp matched the day the HOA's enforcement permits were issued. It was all coming together. He wasn't pretending to have power. He was renting it. That realization hit harder than any gunfight I'd ever been in. This man had weaponized bureaucracy. He'd learned how to use systems meant for order as tools of control. That night, I went back to Dean Ridge Estates and parked just beyond the sign. The roads were empty, houses glowing with the warm hum of lives lived in ignorance. Karen's home stood near the center, large, modern, sterile, like a government building pretending to be domestic. The porch light flickered every few seconds, and I wondered if even that was part of her illusion of control. Through the window, I saw her pacing, phone pressed to her ear. She wasn't calm. Whatever sense of invincibility she had on that highway was gone now. Fear changes posture faster than guilt. The following morning, the first signs of panic began. Residents started calling the sheriff's office asking if the HOA was being investigated. Someone had leaked news of the federal involvement. Curtis went underground, deactivating company websites and transferring funds into crypto wallets registered under new aliases. It didn't matter. Morales' team was already tracing him through the blockchain. Karen, meanwhile, started showing up at the county courthouse, trying to plead ignorance. "I didn't know what he was doing," she told anyone who'd listen. "I was just enforcing rules." Rules she made up. Rules that robbed people of their homes. The community began to fracture. Neighbors who once obeyed her every order now whispered about taking her to court. But Curtis had planned for that, too. He'd written indemnity clauses into the HOA bylaws, shielding himself from direct liability while pinning all operational authority on Karen. She was the fall woman, the face that would burn while he walked away. I saw it before she did. She thought she could talk her way out. He knew she couldn't. Morales briefed me one evening in the field office. "We've got enough for a RICO case," she said. "Wire fraud, impersonation, tax evasion. But we need one more piece. Direct evidence of him ordering the impersonation acts." I knew exactly where to find it. Curtis wasn't stupid, but he was arrogant, and arrogance always leaves a fingerprint. In the confiscated HOA SUV, beneath the driver's seat, we'd found a digital recorder. It had captured their last patrol briefing, Curtis's voice clear as day. "Make it look official. If anyone argues, flash the lights. People obey uniforms." I remember replaying that line, the casual cruelty of it. To him, obedience was a game. To me, it was sacred. That recording became the linchpin. Federal warrants followed within 48 hours. Morales coordinated raids across 3 counties. Karen's house was hit first. She was found sitting at her kitchen table, head in her hands, surrounded by documents she didn't understand. The agent said she looked relieved when they knocked. Curtis wasn't as calm. When they stormed his office, he tried to destroy a hard drive. They caught him mid-swipe, hand shaking, mouth full of curses. As he was cuffed, he glared at the cameras and said, "You people think you've won. You don't even know who protects you." I watched the footage later from my desk, replaying his last words. Protection. He'd built his entire empire on the illusion of it. But protection isn't control. It's service. It's sacrifice. He'd forgotten that. Karen had never learned it. The HOA they built wasn't a community. It was a cage. And now, for the first time, the locks were turning against them. As the news broke, the headlines were merciless. Fake HOA police unmasked in multi-million-dollar fraud. Comment sections flooded with outrage and disbelief. People across the country shared their own HOA horror stories. Some laughed, some cried, some called for reform. But all of them said the same thing. Finally, someone fought back. I turned off the TV, the glow fading across my living room walls. Outside, the wind carried the low hum of night traffic. Somewhere out there, real officers were still protecting real communities, and that's what kept me steady. Because this wasn't about one HOA or one Karen. It was about drawing the line where illusion ends and law begins. And I intended to make sure that line never blurred again. The investigation shifted from surface to structure, from personalities to patterns. By now, the case wasn't about a few forged fines or a clipboard-wielding Karen. It was about an infrastructure built to deceive. I spent the next 72 hours cross-referencing documents, tracing every wire transfer, every LLC signature, every falsified permit that had crossed Curtis Dean's hands. The man hadn't just created a fake HOA, he had constructed an invisible empire of paper and pixels. My desk became a map of the scam. Post-it notes for shell companies, red strings of financial ties stretching between state databases, and printed screenshots of property deeds signed by non-existent officers. The deeper I went, the more it resembled organized crime, but with one crucial difference. It hid behind the polite facade of neighborhood civility. Dean Residential Trust, Civic Management Group, Urban Preservation Council, names that sounded like progress but were designed for laundering. Hoakaren was just the mouthpiece, the smile they used to sell the illusion. The rest operated in silence, filing fake compliance reports to justify millions in siphoned funds. It wasn't fraud dressed as chaos. It was fraud dressed as order. And that's what made it dangerous. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. By week's end, my file stack was over 8 inches thick. And still, it felt like I was staring at the edge of something far larger. Each discovery opened another corridor. Karen's signature appeared on internal memos she never wrote. The formatting matched Curtis's company templates, suggesting they used her name as a legal firewall. When Morales' team decrypted Curtis's main laptop, the truth unfolded line by line. HOA enforcement vehicles, purchase via civic expense fund, resale at market rate, reinvest. He wasn't just impersonating law enforcement. He was using that illusion to move stolen property across state lines. Every SUV, every set of flashing lights, every uniform stitched with the fake seal. They were all funded by stolen dues from homeowners who thought they were paying for lawn maintenance. That realization cracked something cold inside me. Corruption at that scale wasn't spontaneous. It was studied. Curtis knew exactly how people think. He knew that suburban order depends on one thing: fear of disorder. Convince people their neighborhood is in danger, and they'll pay anything to keep it safe. He sold that fear door to door, using Karen's face and a script that sounded righteous. I'd read one of their letters. It promised safety compliance, community peacekeeping, enhanced residential security. All of it empty language designed to cloak extortion in legitimacy. I brought the findings to Captain Daniels and Special Agent Morales at the field office that Friday. We laid the evidence across a table that looked more like a war map than a conference desk. Daniels traced one finger along a line of transactions that bounced from Texas to Delaware, through Wyoming, and ended offshore. "He's using corporate nesting," he said. "A legal matryoshka. You open one shell and there's another inside." Morales nodded. "He's registered the same companies under slightly different names across multiple states to exploit LLC protection laws. We can't just freeze one account. We have to pull the entire chain at once." I asked how many chains. She looked up from her laptop. 15, minimum. For a moment, the room fell silent, except for the low buzz of fluorescent lights. I stared at the printouts, feeling the same mix of awe and anger I'd felt years ago dismantling cartel operations overseas. But this wasn't a jungle network. It was a suburban one, disguised behind well-trimmed hedges and freshly painted mailboxes. Curtis had turned the American dream into a business model. Morales leaned back, her voice flat. "We're moving this into federal territory. Wire fraud, tax evasion, impersonation. Once we connect the money to the fake enforcement unit, it's RICO." Daniels exhaled. "That's the hammer." I nodded slowly. "Then let's swing it." We split duties that afternoon. Morales handled the financial tracing while I worked with the State Legal Bureau to obtain warrants. Each signature required a mountain of justification. Every affidavit had to be bulletproof. Curtis's defense would claim he was simply protecting community interests, that the HOA's enforcement was an overstep, not a crime. We couldn't afford a single misstep. As I drafted my report, I referenced federal impersonation laws, Title 18, Section 912, and local civil statutes governing private security enforcement. My language was precise, clinical, unforgiving. Every paragraph read like a blade sharpened on both edges. That night, I returned home long after midnight. The wind carried the distant hum of highway traffic, the kind of sound that usually calms me. But not that night. Something felt different. My mailbox was open. Inside, a manila envelope without a stamp, just my name in black ink. No return address. I carried it inside, laid it on the kitchen table, and slid a knife along the top. Inside was a single sheet of paper with one sentence typed dead center. You're digging into things that don't concern you. Below it, a printed photo. Me, leaving the federal building that morning. Someone had been watching. I called Morales immediately. They know we're coming. She didn't sound surprised. They always do, but they can't stop it. She instructed me to install a new security system, to rotate my route to work, to vary my parking. The old instincts came back like muscle memory. Checking shadows, memorizing license plates, tracking reflections in glass. That's what corruption does. It tries to make the honest paranoid. Over the next week, I doubled down. We subpoenaed telecom records, property deeds, financial transfers, and HOA minutes. Each one told a piece of the same story. Curtis's reach extended through contractors, realtors, and even a county clerk who'd accidentally misplaced inspection records. Morales called it white-collar racketeering with blue-collar victims. She was right. These weren't elites skimming numbers on Wall Street. These were predators targeting neighborhoods, stealing from retirees and veterans who believed in their community. We traced Curtis's final laundering point, a private investment firm posing as an infrastructure contractor. It operated out of a renovated warehouse in Houston's industrial district. Morales authorized surveillance, and I joined the team. From the car, I watched employees load sealed boxes marked HOA records into delivery trucks at 2:00 a.m. There was nothing legal about it. The next morning, we intercepted one of the trucks, seized the contents, and cracked the boxes open. Inside weren't records, but hundreds of confiscated property deeds, signed over under threat of compliance foreclosure. The scam had evolved beyond fines. They were stealing land. The next few hours blurred into reports, photos, and chain of custody signatures. Morales's voice echoed in the chaos. This just became national. The Department of Housing and Urban Development joined in. Federal prosecutors were briefed. By evening, headlines were already leaking through the press. Fake HOA Syndicate under federal investigation. Karen's face reappeared on screens nationwide, frozen mid-shout from the viral video. The internet laughed, but I didn't. She wasn't a punchline anymore. She was Exhibit A. When I got home that night, the same black SUV was parked across the street again. Engine off, windows dark. I didn't hesitate. I stepped out, badge visible, sidearm holstered but ready. I walked to the edge of my property and stood there until the driver flicked the headlights on. The SUV rolled forward, slow, deliberate, then disappeared into the night. That was the last time I saw it. By then, I knew Curtis's network was panicking. They were watching because they knew exposure was worse than arrest. The next morning, I met Morales and Daniels at headquarters. The tone was different now. No longer defensive, but offensive. The data team had frozen 6 of Curtis's accounts overnight, blocking nearly $4 million in movement. The man who had built his empire on fake rules was about to face real ones. Morales handed me a file marked Final Affidavit, Operation Blue. Line! "You started this," she said. "You should be there when it ends." I nodded. Count on it. That evening I drove home with the siren of distant justice in my ears, a sound louder than any flashing light. The case had moved from local scandal to federal pursuit, and the line between illusion and law had finally, unmistakably, broken. But even then, I knew it wasn't over. Because when you rip the mask off corruption, you don't just find one face, you find a system built to protect it. And I wasn't finished dismantling that system. Not yet. By the time the warrants were signed, the story had already spread like wildfire. News anchors framed it as a bizarre comedy. Fake HOA cops pulled over by the real police. But on the inside, the tension was anything but funny. Karen's face had become a meme, plastered across every social feed, while Curtis Dean's name was now attached to federal subpoenas. The power dynamic had flipped overnight, but people like Curtis don't surrender. They double down. He started fighting back in silence first. False reports to my department, anonymous tips claiming misconduct, even doctored photos sent to internal affairs. It was amateur misdirection, a desperate attempt to shift the narrative. But the evidence spoke louder than any lie. Morales's team was tightening the noose, every financial trail coiling closer around him. Still, I knew we hadn't seen his real move yet. The man who built a paper kingdom wouldn't go out without trying to set fire to the matchbook. The first threat came as a phone call to the station. A calm, male voice asked for me by name, said he was with the community's legal advisory board, and wanted to negotiate terms for a peaceful resolution. I didn't respond, just listened to the smooth, rehearsed tone, like a salesman reading a script. When he said, "You've embarrassed powerful people, Officer Hale," I hung up. My captain stared from across the room. "They're panicking," he said. "Good." Panic meant vulnerability. Panic meant the mask was cracking. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. By noon, Morales had confirmed the call came from a burner traced to an office complex Curtis once rented. Within hours, social media erupted with anonymous posts claiming the investigation was politically motivated, that I was targeting innocent homeowners. Bots pushed it, coordinated, timed to muddy the water. It didn't work. The truth was too clear. The HOA wasn't a local drama anymore. It had become a national symbol of arrogance versus accountability. People saw through the spin. Still, that didn't stop the intimidation. I started finding small reminders that they knew where I lived. A scratched car door, mail opened before I got to it, an envelope with nothing inside but a single clipped headline reading, "Whistleblower found dead in Texas." Fear has a way of whispering louder than threats, but I refused to listen. That same week, Curtis made his first public statement through a lawyer. "My client denies all wrongdoing," it read. "The so-called investigation is an overreach by law enforcement into private community management." Overreach. The word burned. For months, they'd overreached into people's lives, dictating who could park where, what color houses could be, what flags could fly. And now they wanted to call justice an invasion. Morales filed a motion to freeze all Dean family accounts and requested a federal injunction to seize HOA property assets. It was granted. Overnight, everything Curtis built began collapsing under paperwork he couldn't control. His fake empire of forms and citations was being dismantled by real ones. The escalation came faster than I expected. That Friday, a local reporter named Dana Shaw cornered me outside the courthouse. "Officer Hale," she called, voice sharp and camera already rolling. How does it feel to be the man who brought down the state's most corrupt HOA? I stopped, caught between exhaustion and instinct. It's not about bringing anyone down, I said. It's about making sure authority means something again. That clip aired that night, and within hours, the internet turned the line into a rallying cry. Homeowners across the country started posting their own HOA horror stories, tagging mine under one message: authority belongs to the honest. It was never my goal to go viral, but sometimes justice finds its own amplifier. By the following week, the Deans were under siege from every angle. The FBI raided their storage units, discovering counterfeit badges, fake license plates, and arrest logs signed by community enforcement officers. The local courthouse was packed with reporters every morning. Karen arrived each day in oversized sunglasses, her posture shrinking with every appearance. Curtis stopped showing up altogether, sending lawyers instead. Their empire was disintegrating one headline at a time. But with exposure came new danger. When corruption starts dying, it fights like an animal cornered. One night, as I pulled into my driveway, headlights flared behind me. I watched in the mirror. Same black SUV from weeks before. It stopped halfway up the road, idling. I stepped out, resting one hand on my holster, and the vehicle crept forward before peeling off into the dark. No plates again. I logged it, but something told me it wasn't random. These weren't men used to losing control, and they were desperate to reclaim even a fragment of it. The next morning, Morales called. "We've intercepted messages from Curtis's encrypted accounts," she said. "He's talking about witnesses, retaliation, evidence to clean up. He's unraveling." That afternoon, the Department of Justice formally announced the investigation as a joint task force operation. News outlets called it the HOA Takedown. For once, the word HOA didn't mean bureaucracy. It meant exposure. Karen was brought in for questioning. When confronted with recordings of her brother's voice directing the fake patrols, her facade cracked. She tried to claim ignorance, but her tone trembled under the weight of the facts. "He told me it was legal," she whispered. "He said it was community policy." Morales leaned forward. "Community policy doesn't include fake sirens and forged warrants." Karen's hands shook as she signed her confession. Curtis's arrest was less graceful. Surveillance caught him fleeing his Houston office the next day. He drove south toward the border, but agents intercepted him before he made it out of the county. The footage showed him stepping out of his SUV, hands raised, mouth still moving like he could talk his way out of it. He couldn't. The moment his cuffs clicked, the last illusion of control shattered. The man who believed he could buy authority had finally met the weight of real authority. The public reaction was overwhelming. Homeowners formed advocacy groups overnight, demanding oversight of HOA operations across the country. Legislators began proposing new federal statutes on private enforcement. It was bigger than me now. Bigger than Karen or Curtis. It was about every American who'd ever been bullied by false power. I didn't speak to the media again. I didn't need to. The evidence was speaking for itself. The trial date came fast. I spent those weeks preparing testimony, reviewing evidence logs, and revisiting every decision from the night of that first traffic stop. Each step led back to the same truth. A single moment of standing firm had rippled into a nationwide reckoning. The courtroom overflowed with reporters when the proceedings began. Karen sat at the defense table, eyes hollow. Curtis refused to look at anyone. When the prosecutor played the audio clip, his own voice saying, "Make it look official. People obey uniforms." The room fell silent. It was the sound of ego collapsing under proof. Cross-examination was brutal. Curtis's lawyer tried to frame the operation as community service gone wrong. I stayed composed, testifying only to facts: the fake badges, the bank transfers, the confiscated deeds, the intimidation tactics. Every word was another nail in the coffin of their narrative. Karen broke first. Midway through the hearing, she stood and shouted, "It wasn't supposed to go this far." The judge warned her to sit down. Curtis just stared at the floor, his empire reduced to evidence exhibits and legal jargon. When the verdict came, it was swift. Guilty on all counts: wire fraud, impersonation, racketeering, tax evasion. Karen cried silently as deputies led her away. Curtis tried to glare at me, but there was nothing left in his eyes but disbelief. Outside, the crowd roared. Reporters shouted questions I didn't answer. Cameras flashed like lightning, but I wasn't there for the noise. I was there for the silence that follows justice. The silence that feels like peace. I stood at the courthouse steps and looked at the horizon. For the first time in months, the sky looked open again. The fake lights were gone, the real ones still burning. What began as a roadside stop had ended as a federal takedown. Karen's clipboard empire was ashes. Curtis's kingdom of forged paper was shredded and filed into evidence. And I finally understood what my captain meant years ago when he said, "Sometimes you don't need to chase power to defeat it. You just have to show up with the truth and refuse to move." That truth had spoken louder than their entire network, and the law had finally caught up with the lie. Justice isn't loud. It moves like a tide, slow, steady, impossible to stop once it begins to rise. After the verdict, the headlines carried the victory, but the real work had only just begun. What Curtis Dean built wasn't just a scam. It was a symptom of something deeper. A system that let people like him twist small authority into a weapon. My job now was to make sure it never happened again. The Department of Justice turned the case into a federal task force model. Morales and I were assigned to audit other HOAs under similar community enforcement banners. What we uncovered stretched far beyond Dean Ridge Estates. Over a dozen HOAs across the state were using cloned bylaws, all copied from Curtis's original charter, each one funneling homeowner money into offshore accounts disguised as maintenance trusts. The operation had metastasized. Small towns, gated communities, even retirement villages. It wasn't just greed, it was infrastructure. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. We called it Operation Civic Purge. For 3 months, we ran coordinated sweeps with the FBI, IRS, and Department of Housing. Each week brought a new raid, new arrests, new board members claiming ignorance while sitting on accounts worth millions. It wasn't vengeance, it was reclamation. The people who'd spent years being bullied by letters signed HOA Enforcement were finally seeing those signatures replaced with indictments. The sound of printers running in federal offices became the anthem of justice. Every page another cut through Curtis's web. Morales joked once that paperwork was sharper than any blade. She wasn't wrong. Karen's name surfaced again in post-trial interviews. She'd started cooperating, feeding us records Curtis had hidden. Her remorse wasn't pure, but it was useful. "He always said the system doesn't care who holds the gavel, just who writes the rules," she told us during deposition. "He thought as long as he looked official, nobody would question him." I asked what made her believe him. She stared at the floor. Because it worked. That was the sickness we were curing. Not greed, but belief in false power. For every Karen we caught, there were a dozen others mimicking her tactics, convinced they could build authority from thin air and clipboards. Morales coordinated a national database cross-check, comparing HOA filings, tax IDs, and trademarked logos. Within days, patterns emerged. Same graphic design firms, same registration agents, same offshore intermediaries. Curtis hadn't been working alone. He'd been franchising fraud. The discovery sent shockwaves through Washington. What started as a single patrol stop was now an interstate operation under federal investigation. The Attorney General himself issued a statement. The law is not a costume. Authority is not for sale. It was the first time in my career I'd seen the government speak my language. The days blurred together in a rhythm of evidence and enforcement. We'd start at dawn, raiding offices where HOA boards once met, walls lined with certificates and community maps. But behind every framed mission statement was a ledger of deceit. We confiscated hard drives, forged contracts, blank citation pads ready for distribution. Each building felt the same, sterile, over-organized, the smell of paper and fear. The illusion of order always looked cleaner before it broke. At night, when the adrenaline faded, I'd drive through the same neighborhoods that once lived under those false rules. The air felt lighter. Flags that had been taken down were flying again. Driveways once empty out of fear of fines were full of parked cars. People had their lives back, not because someone gave them permission, but because someone finally took fear off their shoulders. One evening, Morales called while I sat in my cruiser overlooking the city. "You ever think about how this started?" she asked. "One fake stop, one clipboard, one lie." I nodded even though she couldn't see. "And one truth that didn't back down." She laughed quietly. "You know, I think you broke their business model. You proved that illusion doesn't scare courage." The media wanted interviews, talk shows, documentaries. I turned them all down. This story wasn't about fame. It was about fixing what people stopped believing in, the idea that law exists to protect, not control. The country was learning that again. Homeowner associations across the nation began rewriting their charters. Some disbanded entirely. Federal legislation was introduced to regulate private enforcement entities, dubbed the Dean Reform Act. I didn't name it, but it fit. The law Curtis tried to manipulate now bore his name as a warning. Karen, serving her reduced sentence, sent a letter from county jail. It was brief, shaky handwriting on lined paper. "I wanted power because I thought it made people listen. Turns out people only listen when they trust you. You taught me that. I hope someday I can make it right." I folded it carefully and filed it away. Redemption doesn't erase guilt, but it can redirect it. Months later, Morales and I stood before the federal board summarizing the operation. Charts and timelines covered the walls, showing the collapse of a network that once spanned hundreds of communities. When my turn came, I kept my words simple. Fake authority thrives where real authority stays silent. We stopped that silence. The room was quiet when I finished. Sometimes the loudest applause is the absence of doubt. Afterward, Morales clapped my shoulder. "You ever going back to highway patrol?" she asked. "Maybe," I said. "Highways make sense. Lines are painted. People know the rules, neighborhoods." I paused. "They're murkier. Too easy for people to mistake control for order." She smiled. "Then maybe you were meant to fix the murky places." Driving home that night, I realized she was right. The law isn't about the places that run smoothly. It's about the ones that don't. The job isn't done when the cuffs click. It's done when fear doesn't return. When I pulled into my driveway, the porch light flickered just like it did that first night after Karen's fake stop. Back then, it felt ominous. Now it just looked like home needing a new bulb. I shut off the engine, stepped into the quiet, and breathed in the clean, unguarded air. The badge on my belt was heavy, but for once, it didn't feel like a shield. It felt like a promise that I'd keep standing between illusion and law, no matter how many times the uniform changed. Because real authority doesn't need flashing lights to be seen. It just needs someone willing to carry it. The trial ended months ago, but its echoes never really stopped. Justice doesn't fade quietly. It leaves a resonance that hums through every place it touched. Dean Ridge Estates was no longer the same community. It was something cleaner, quieter, real. The fake patrol SUVs were gone, the office stripped bare, the phony badges boxed and labeled as federal evidence. For the first time in years, the neighborhood existed without fear. Kids played in front yards again, flags waved without warning letters, and the sound of a car horn no longer triggered suspicion. It was as if the entire community had exhaled, shaking off years of invisible weight. I drove through one last time before closing the case. Unmarked cruiser, window cracked to let in the soft wind. The people waved when they saw the badge glint on my belt, not out of fear, but out of recognition. Real authority feels different. You don't have to announce it. You just have to be there. Before we move forward, comment down from where you're watching right now. Karen's story had become a cautionary tale, replayed in training seminars and law schools across the country. Her name was no longer spoken with anger, but with warning. The system had absorbed the lesson she refused to learn. Power borrowed through imitation always collapses under the weight of truth. Curtis Dean, on the other hand, would spend decades behind bars. His empire of false order was dismantled line by line, every company dissolved, every property reclaimed. Morales told me the federal auction recovered nearly 80% of the stolen funds, most of it redistributed to the homeowners who'd been extorted. Poetic justice, she'd said. I agreed. Paper built his kingdom, paper destroyed it. In the months that followed, the Department of Justice formally recognized the operation as a precedent-setting case in dismantling private impersonation networks. The Dean Act passed unanimously, redefining the limits of private enforcement nationwide. It was strange seeing my name buried in the credits of a law that would outlive me, but that's what legacy is. It's not glory, it's continuity. My father once said, "If you do your job right, nobody remembers your name. They just remember the peace that followed." I finally understood what he meant. Late one evening, Morales called just to check in. "You ever think about what started all this?" she asked. I smiled. A clipboard, a woman with sunglasses too big for her face, and a bad idea. We both laughed. The laughter didn't erase the chaos, but it reframed it. Sometimes history doesn't need grand beginnings, just one quiet moment when someone refuses to yield. That moment on Highway 67, when Karen's fake lights flickered out and truth finally caught the reflection, it had changed everything. I turned down the radio and drove home with the windows down. The smell of pine drifted through the air, the same stretch of highway where it all began rolling out beneath the tires. The road signs flashed by, ordinary and perfect. 65 miles per hour, just as it should be. At the shoulder, wild grass shimmered under the setting sun. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the need to check the mirror. As the horizon turned gold, I thought about the people I'd met, the homeowners who stood their ground, the officers who backed me when it mattered, and even Karen, whose fall had sparked something larger than either of us could have imagined. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers through the spaces it restores. And in that quiet, you hear the truth. That authority isn't claimed, it's earned every day by how you stand when nobody's watching. The badge on my belt caught the last light of day, a shimmer that felt more like reflection than power. I slowed as I neared the curve where it all started, the same stretch of asphalt where a woman once thought her clipboard outweighed the law. I smiled faintly, not in triumph, but in understanding. The world will always have people like her. People who crave control because they fear insignificance. But as long as there are those willing to stand their ground, The truth will always have a voice. I rolled the window down fully, letting the wind rush in, carrying away months of tension and noise. The highway stretched ahead, clear and endless. The sound of the tires, steady as a heartbeat. Somewhere behind me, the past was filing itself into history. Ahead, there was only the open road and the quiet promise that the next time illusion tried to wear a badge, the law would already be waiting. Because in the end, power pretends. But justice? Justice doesn't.